Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very special morning with Carnegie India. We are live out of Bangalore. I say the word live because we are live on Facebook right now. Thanks so much for coming in. I know everybody's coming off a long weekend, so the good start to the working week or whatever is remaining of it. Thanks for being here, and on behalf of Carnegie India, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you for this very special seminar, which we're hosting in partnership with iSPIRT. Today we will discuss technology and policy frameworks that can best address fears associated with data ownership and usage. My name is Shivnath. I work with Carnegie, and we felt that there is nobody better than iSPIRT and Nandan to kind of put this together. And this came from a discussion we had with Nandan a couple of months ago, and he said that we should start looking at it, and hopefully we take it to different cities as well. I've already got a request from Bombay this morning saying, can we get this same format to Bombay as well? And we hopefully will. Since there are many aspects, including the most important one on privacy, which is right now in the Supreme Court, where the order is reserved. So clearly it's a topic which has relevance, concern, and anxiety. So while we wait for that, there is a greater need to debate the policy frameworks that are needed to ensure issues of data ownership, personal data usage are put in place so that we have a solution which is a win-win for all. I must share with you, and some of you are familiar with our work at Carnegie, our aim is to study and research topics where technology intersects with policy. Many of you may recollect last year, in the same room, we hosted the Global Technology Summit, which is scheduled to be held again this year in December. We had stated then, and I would like to say it again, we are a think tank, and our research is where technology meets policy. We are a neutral, objective, and unbiased institution which believes in listening to and engage with all sides of a debate. This is what makes civil discourse in a democracy more vibrant and upholds the basic principle of tark and vitark, logical reasoning and questioning, to help reach conclusions based on evidence. On today's subject of data democracy, data rights, and data ownership, there is no one better than Nandan Nilekani, who has been instrumental in creating the unique identity platform, Aadhaar, through which about 1 billion Indians are today reaping the benefits of public goods, delivery of public goods. Although some would say there is way too much tark and vitark and vivad creating around that, which Nandan may or may not like. But that's the way democracy thrives. We have to live with it. Today, the panel discussion will be the last one in which Nandan, Sanjay, Sharad, and Rahul Mathan, and we also have a special guest in C.V. Madhukar from Omidyar who will be there. But we start off with Nandan's talk, followed by Sanjay Jain. He's with IIM Ahmedabad at the Center of Entrepreneurship, and he will give his talk in combination, consonance with 5 more people, total of 5 people. That will be the tech-heavy session where there'll be a bit of Q&A. For Nandan's session, there is no Q&A during his talk, but at the panel discussion, feel free to address any questions to him as well. Sanjay's talk is around electronic data consent, a model for sharing data and managing privacy. The panel discussion's focus is data ownership, usage, and privacy. I would also like to welcome all our viewers on Carnegie India's Facebook page, where we are going live right now. But before I ask Nandan and kickstart the session, I would like to request R.K. Mishra, a well-known figure in Bangalore, who also is with Carnegie India, to share our plans on tech and policy program, which is largely based out of here. R.K., over to you.
Thank you, Shivnath. Welcome. Great to see all of you on a Monday morning. Not Monday morning. Looks Monday. It is not a Monday, but it looks like a Monday because long weekend. And luckily, no rain last night, so Nandan could come here. His area was in trouble. So great to have you all here. And many of you, I think most of you attended our Global Tech Summit last December. It was the first attempt by Carnegie, and I think by anybody in the country, to bring policymakers, regulators, and the techpreneurs and technology leaders on the same platform. And the feedback we got, that people are really happy that a forum like this is being created. And that is our annual summit in which we take topics of interest globally as well as for India. This year's Tech Summit is again in December. Time is fixed, December, first week, 7th and 8th of December. So please make note. You should be getting an email soon. Also, apart from the annual summit, we do deep dives quarterly. So for example, after our tech summit in December, we did a fintech deep dive, which was in Delhi. And we had Niti Aayog CEO, Amitabh Kant, the regulators, all were there. And this is the event we are doing here in Bangalore, as Shivnath explained. And we will be following it up with our Global Tech Summit in December. And this year's theme also includes bilateral country to country. Last year we had Israel. This year we are going much deeper and much wider with Japan. And some of our colleagues from Japan are here, and they have been we just finished our visit to Japan. There's huge interest, especially the technology ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem, and venture funding ecosystem in Japan to engage with India. Both our prime ministers are very keen. So this is also fully supported and encouraged by the governments, both the governments. So we look forward to seeing you in December. Enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivnath and RK, and I'll speak about a topic or a concept that we are talking about called data democracy. And it's really about how strategic data is in the world today. In some sense, we are doing this talk in 2017, and 2017 has many 10-year anniversaries. The most famous anniversary is that on June 29, 2007, Apple launched the iPhone, which changed the whole world of smartphones. But it's also the anniversary of the year in which Netflix went from being a company that put a DVD into a FedEx envelope and sent it to you to launch streaming. And today you know what has happened with Netflix and streaming. And it's also the year in which Google started mapping all the objects or buildings in the world with Street View. So it's a very important anniversary in multiple ways. And all these three things have something to do with data. Now, today, 10 years later, since the launch of the smartphone, we have about 2.5 billion people have smartphones in the world, and that is only going to increase in the years to come. We are going to see India alone adds about 100 million smartphones a year, and that is also being supported by, in some sense, data-intensive feature phones. The Reliance Jio feature phone is like a smartphone without touch. It's really a phone which has an OS and has software and data. And the big thing is that the combination of the fact that for the first time, billions of people have a personal device, along with the fact that these devices generate data to an incredible extent compared to anything before, because every smartphone comes packed with all kinds of sensors. It has accelerometer, gyrometer, a GPS chip, 2 cameras. I was reading somewhere that the default is going to be 8 cameras per phone. I don't know why you need 8 cameras, but that's what people are saying. All kinds of things. So the phone, both the fact the number of phones is reaching billions, and the fact that each phone has so many of these data generating things is very, very huge creator of data. And this is really a phenomenon which has happened in the last 10 years. Now, the next thing in that phenomenon is what's popularly called as the Internet of Things, which means that not only you have a phone in your pocket, but you have multiple sensors in multiple objects. So your fridge has a sensor or sensors, your car has hundreds of sensors, your microwave has sensors, and so on. And if you can just see what's been happening in the last several years, in 1960, when we had mainframes, the ratio of people to hardware was like 40-1. So those who grew up in that era didn't have computer, they would go and give us, a card deck to somebody to run for them, to run a program. And today we're going to 4 devices per person by 2020. So there's a dramatic shift in the ratio of electronic devices to people. And these devices in turn are packed with multiple sensors, all of which are generating data. So we're really entering a world where data is a tsunami of data has been created thanks to technology. And IoT alone will bring about 50 billion devices online. And ARM, which is the company which has the chip design which powers the smartphone, is also a big lead in IoT. They expect to sell 1 trillion chips a year by 2035. So that's the kind of scale of chips and devices generating data which we are going to see in the coming years. Now, what this says is that everything and everyone will be connected. And the dramatic lowering of costs of these devices means that you can put it in more and more devices. I was talking to a person from a leading manufacturer of toothpaste and toothbrushes, and he said they're going to put a sensor in a toothbrush. So I said, why do you need a sensor in a toothbrush? He said, look, we know if we put a sensor in a toothbrush and we know how people are brushing the teeth, then we can advise them on how to have the best practices in brushing the teeth. And the whole dental market is $30 billion. The whole dentistry market is $300 billion. So we can therefore increase our size of the market because we'll prevent you from going to a dentist. So anyway, I don't know whether dentists would like this solution. But the point is that even somebody making a toothbrush is talking about putting a sensor in the toothbrush. So that's the kind of things that are happening with data. And all this is generating massive amounts of data. And this has also seen the rise of platforms who have learned how to harness this data extremely well. These are companies all over the world. In the United States, you have leaders. Some people call them GAFA, which is Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. Some people call them FANG, which is Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, depending on which acronym you use. All these companies have built gigantic platforms that are collecting all this data. And the same thing is happening in China, where China has supported state policy. And you have companies like Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba, the so-called BAT trilogy, which are collecting data from everybody. And this is not just limited to the new tech companies. You're seeing this with more older companies. GE, which is more than 110 years old, has launched something called Predix, which is basically their cloud offering for IoT, where they're going to have all their devices connected. So every GE aircraft engine will be connected, and it will anticipate when it needs maintenance and all that. So this data is not only something that is being used by the newer companies, but even by traditional companies. And what is happening with these platforms, that these platforms not only solve major problems, but also capture and claim ownership of the data produced by user interaction. So when everybody interacts with the user, that digital footprint or that digital usage pattern is captured, and often the ownership is also claimed by the platform. So platforms end up having data of billions of users in a very, very intricate manner because they are capturing the most exhaustive set of interactions with that user. So that's the big thing, that data is not only products are solving problems, but data is getting captured. The data is just accumulating with everybody. And what happens with data is that data creates a virtuous cycle. So the more users you have, the more data that you create. The more data that you create, the better the quality of products, because you can anticipate people's usage. And the more products you have, the more users you attract. So this virtuous cycle is dominating this business of platforms, and therefore collecting more and more data and applying it to these kind of things has become very, very important. And this is actually, again, explained by two cycles. When platforms began collecting data, it was typically to give a more targeted ad to the person, or it was to give a better customer experience. So if you were a social media or a search platform, you collected data so that you could give an ad which exactly represents the purchasing aspiration of the individual. Or if you were an e-commerce site, you use the data to recommend something else that the customer would like to buy. So data in its first avatar of usage was really used for optimizing commercial transactions, which allowed you to increase sales or increase ads. But the big thing that has happened is now data is the basis for artificial intelligence. This is a more recent phenomenon where when you have these billions of data points, you can apply AI, machine learning, deep learning, and you can become more and more better at understanding so many things in the world. And so this combination of the first generation use of data for purely for ads and so on, and now what I call a second generation usage because of AI is really making that data even more valuable. And there's enough evidence to show that, at least in today's technology, the more data you have is the most single defining feature of the quality of your solutions. In the sense, obviously the algorithms have to be very good too, but data is the biggest determinant. In other words, the more data you have, the more powerful becomes the quality of your algorithms. A good example of that, let's take Google Maps. Google Maps was the first major attempt by a private company to map the world. It was an amazing act of foresight by Google, almost 15, 17 years back. And so they were able to map the world. Now, before that came along, maps were not done by private companies. They were done by governments. India is actually a leader because the Survey of India was set up in the 19th century, in 1850s, and India was mapped end to end. So, India was a pioneer in surveying. So, and the Survey of India still exists in Dehradun. But what we saw now was the arrival of private companies that create maps. So, the one example is they create the map. And then, as I said, with Street View, they went around the world and photographed everything. And then, when you have billions of photographs, you can then use machine learning and image recognition to then figure out which object is at which intersection and so on. And then once you have the phone, and Google has the Android phone, you know the location of 1 billion people with their phones, and then you can map traffic, and that's why you can predict how long it will take to go to Bangalore airport. So fundamentally, this use of data, machine learning is all becoming very, very complex. And what happens with this is that since the more data you have, the more better services you offer, you get with a winner-take-all model, because the guy with more data wins, and therefore it's a winner-take model. Two examples of this are where we have taken two different markets. The US market for digital advertising and the Chinese market for mobile payments. In 2016, just two companies, Google and Facebook, dominated 71% of total ad spending in the US, these two platforms, and 89% of the total growth. So incremental growth was actually accumulating in just two platforms. And this is Mary Meeker's data. And in China, what China did was they allowed the internet companies to offer payments. And Alibaba was becoming a huge e-commerce company. They launched Alipay, which is the payment method on Alibaba website. So, and more the transactions that grew on Alibaba, more the transactions that happened on Alipay. And similarly, WeChat, which was owned by Tencent, became the messaging platform of China. So close to 900 million people in China use WeChat. And then they built payments into WeChat. So you can buy from WeChat and all this QR code and all this stuff. And fundamentally, because of this, both had network effects, both had data. And today, 93% of mobile payments in China are either Alipay or WeChat. So you can see in both cases how data and platforms can rapidly become dominant in a particular market. And I gave you two different examples. And as I mentioned, when you have data now with AI, it actually accelerates the speed of disruption. The reason for that is data commoditizes domain knowledge. Historically, businesses had different moats or barriers of entry. They had barriers of entry thanks to distribution, so they had a large network of shops, or they had a barrier of entry because they controlled the mines or whatever it is. One of the ways that companies had was they had domain knowledge. So they have been doing air conditioning for 100 years. They know air conditioning. They have deep domain knowledge. But fundamentally, the combination of data, algorithms, and AI essentially commoditizes domain knowledge. A good example of that is Netflix. As I said, Netflix till 2007 was essentially sending you DVDs to view at home. But Netflix took a bold decision in 2007 to start doing streaming. And initially, they were streaming content of other content providers. And it made it very attractive for content creators to have Netflix, because the business model before this was content creators sold their content either through theaters, but more importantly to channels. So you had these massive channels, commercial TV, pay TV channels and all that. And the pay TV guys gave a lot of money to the content guys to buy their stuff. But for this, Netflix became an additional channel for that content. So if I already have content, I've already made, Toy Story or something, and Toy Story has already been shown on pay TV, I can additionally give it to Netflix, get a payment for that, and show it. So they found Netflix as an incremental distribution channel for the internet viewers. And Netflix grew from a very small number of users to over 100 million users today. So initial Netflix was a distribution channel for content from Disney or whoever it is. And then in 2013, Netflix started developing original content. And the first show was House of Cards. And I'm sure all of you have watched House of Cards. And House of Cards is the first internet television show that got an Emmy Award. So it's a historic in that sense. It was the first show produced for television that got an Emmy Award. And the important thing is Netflix has data of its users' behavior, which no content guy has. I mean, Disney may have the data of people who come to the theme parks, but they don't have the data on the behavior of their viewers. And nor does the channel, nor do the pay TV guys have their data. But Netflix, because it's an internet company with data, knows exactly who is watching what kind of program, who likes thrillers, who likes romantic comedies, who likes whatever, what time they watch, how long they watch, how many of them are binge watchers, the whole thing. In fact, Netflix invented the concept of binge watching, which I'm sure some of you may not tell me, but secretly would have done, which is that you get a notification that the next season of House of Cards or Narcos is up, and then you spend the whole weekend watching that. And they designed this concept of play forward. So if you're doing nothing, at the end of the episode, the next episode starts. Because fundamentally, if you read Hastings, who's the brilliant CEO of Netflix, he says, my only competition is sleep. And many people stay up all night watching this stuff. But what's important is that Netflix began content in 2013. And the last Emmy Awards 2 weeks back, they had won 93 Emmys. Here's a company which didn't do content till 4 years back, is now the second highest Emmy winner after HBO. And HBO is like the father of great shows. I mean, HBO's came out with Sopranos, and even today, Game of Thrones and all that. So HBO is recognized for the last 50 years as a great producer of high-level content. And this company comes, and within 4 years, has become the second largest company for Emmys. And they have Narcos, and they have Master of None, and all kinds of shows. And what's important is that all this is done with data. It's not that they don't give creative license to, obviously they give full creativity to the producer of the shows, but they also use data to understand user behavior, and that informs the way they conceptualize content. And today, I don't know if you saw last week, Disney has made a decision that after 2019, they're not going to give any more movies to Netflix. They're going to launch their own consumer channel, because they have to reach the consumer directly, because they need to know what consumers are doing with their content. So there's a very fundamental shift happening in the television industry, where people are cutting the cord, which means they're cutting off pay TV and Dish and all that, and they're all going to Netflix. And of course, Amazon has Amazon Prime Video, which means you buy Prime and then you can watch all the movies that you want. So fundamentally, there's a massive shift happening. But my point is that data and machine learning is actually changing these markets because people are using data as a source of competitive advantage. Another example is Alibaba. In 2013, the same year that Netflix launched House of Cards, and this is all just 4 years back, it's not like a lifetime back, they launched Yaobao, which is what says leftover treasure, which is an app-based money market fund. And this app-based money market fund had the behavioral details of everybody on Alibaba. They knew their buying patterns, they knew how much money they left behind, and they said, you know, you have this little bit of money lying in your wallet, maybe why don't you just move it into a fund and we'll give you a good rate of interest. And they started giving a rate of interest which was more attractive than bank deposits. And you know, India is going to see the same, by the way, very soon. And within 10 months, they had $90 billion in this fund. And by now, they are the world's largest fund with $165 billion. Again, they were able to leverage the data and behavior and consumption pattern and payment pattern of the customers to make it a very, very attractive thing. So this is what's happening with data. The data has the ability to commoditize domain knowledge. It has this winner-take-all behavior, and it has speed. You can very rapidly become a leader in an industry which you didn't know anything about. Because you combine massive data with machine learning, you can figure out a lot of things that you don't need experts for. So data is a new kind of resource. It's very, very strategic. It's an unlimited resource, right? So you keep generating data. It's not like oil or something finite. And it's also what economists call as non-rivalrous, which means that it doesn't matter if more than one person has the data. It doesn't reduce the value of the data. So therefore, it's non-rival. However, in spite of being both unlimited and non-rivalrous, it's not shared freely. Because the guys who have the data understand the value of data. So what is happening is data producers, and this data is coming from social media, it's coming from e-commerce, it's coming from location-based services, it's coming from search, are now becoming data consumers. And it is because of that, they are able to move rapidly into adjacencies. They're able to go into other markets. And often the other markets are not obvious. I mean, if you had said 10 years back that companies would be, tech companies would be into self-driving cars, we'll say, what's wrong, what's happening, why are they in self-driving cars? But because they have the maps, because they have the lay of the, what's on every road, because they have the movement of traffic, because they now have the sensors which can record the pedestrian or the cat or the dog or the horse, and they have the machine learning algorithms, they're actually able to make cars that can drive by itself. And that means, what does it mean for existing players? What does it mean for Ford, Chrysler, Daimler, BMW, Volkswagen, Suzuki, all that? Is fundamentally a set of competitors from a completely different area are going to come into their business with a model of car making which is fundamentally different from the way they've been making cars for the last 100 years. The same thing is happening with retail, fulfillment by Amazon and all that. Anybody can go onto a retail platform. Content and media, I explained what's happening in the tussle between content creators, pay TV and Netflix, and of course with bots like Siri, Cortana, and Alexa and all that stuff. So all these are now having huge implications because now with data you can move into adjacencies very, very quickly and essentially commoditize domain knowledge. So platforms that accumulate user data rapidly disrupt industries, outgrow competition, and create silos. That's really what is happening, and that's what we're saying is data domination. It's happening around the world. Now, this is something that the world is just waking up to, because it's happening so fast that people don't know what's happening. So now people are waking up, and today, all over the world, governments are looking at what needs to be done, and you're seeing activity in the US, you're seeing activity in Europe with the privacy law coming next year, as well as anti-competition provisions, antitrust. You saw the recent case and so on. Japan is planning some tough anti-monopoly rules on data. The Chinese, of course, have been the most advanced. They have stopped all foreign companies, it's only Chinese companies in China. And now they passed a law that says all the data has to be inside the firewall, which means that Apple has just moved a data center in China to keep all its data. So fundamentally, all this is happening and so on. So all this is happening around the world. So this is a very, very important trend, and therefore it's very important that we think about how do we approach all this stuff. Good so far? Now, in the meantime, India is rapidly adopting digital. 290 million Jan Dhan accounts, 1.16 billion Aadhars since inception, 350 million smartphones, 1 billion phones, and every second, 3 more Indians are experiencing the internet for the first time. So India is getting headlong into a digital era at a pace never seen before. So we need to think about what all these global trends mean and what does it mean in terms of Indian trends. And it's becoming the preferred mode of transaction for a wide variety of things. E-sign has already reached 21 million users in 24 months. There are 1 billion issued documents in the locker. UPI transactions, last June was 10 million, July was 11.5 million, so August is expected to be even higher. eKYCs is 340 million eKYC in 3 years. That means with every bank account being opened with a KYC, with every SIM card now having KYC, today the authentications per day on June 30th had reached 40 million. So we're talking about close to 1 billion authentications per month on the Aadhaar system. And there are more than 550 million bank accounts linked to Aadhaar, which has done 72,000 crores or $12 billion in cash transfers into hundreds of accounts. So this is like seriously scaled stuff happening in India, which is thanks to all the technology that we have. So we are basically going very deep, and I'll explain what the implications of all this are. So the way to think about it is that thanks to multiple trends, people are getting onto social platforms. Today, Facebook has 240 million users in India. WhatsApp has over 200 million users in India. Commerce with Flipkart and Amazon. Payments and mobility with Uber and Ola. And the eKYC, paperless process, ID. All this is happening together. Some of them are government programs. Some of them are private programs from the global players. Some of them are domestic players. And then GST. Everything is suddenly becoming a data thing. So what this means is India is going to become data rich very quickly. Very quickly. It's already data rich compared to last year and the year before that. But this data, how do you convert this data into a way that benefits everybody? So it's a strategic question. How do we take advantage of this massive generation of data to create real wealth for users like people and businesses? And therefore, that's a strategic thing which, and since our Carnegie friends say they are at the intersection of policy and technology, I thought this was a good intersection, Shivnath, that India is going to go from being data poor to data rich. How do we strategically think of this data in a way that the country and the people of the country benefit from this? And this data is then, with more and more powerful machine learning and algorithms, is going to lead to more and more possible insights. So we need to think about what are the implications of that. And we are seeing how algorithms are becoming smarter every day. Right? You keep reading these reports. First, Watson beat somebody in chess, then Google beat somebody in Go. All that is happening. But even if you look at what's happening in image recognition, in 2011, 30% of image recognition software failed on the object recognition. It's now down to less than 5%. And human beings are at 5%, which means now computer-based object recognition, image recognition is better than human beings. So it happens very, very quickly. So when you combine this massive data with massive improvements in algorithms, what does that mean? And how do you have a strategy to deal with this? That's really the question of the day. So we're running out of time because it's happening at a very fast pace. I mean, before you know it, it's all over. And if unchecked, this data domination will just keep going. So we have to have a strategic view as a country about doing this. And therefore, we believe that India needs a strategic position on data which really represents three different kinds of risks, because there are three different risks. One is what we call as data colonization, the second is privacy, and the third is winner takes all, or how do you ensure competition? And there are three different issues, and sometimes people conflate all these issues and a lot of confusion, but there are three different issues. Data colonization is the fact that data is being vacuumed out of the country, going into unaccountable systems that don't come under Indian law, which probably share data with some foreign company, foreign governments. That's not where you want to be. You don't want all your data to be sitting in a place where it is unaccountable. Privacy is the big issue. Rahul will talk about it later. It's about privacy. It's about how do you protect people's rights and make sure that the data is not abused. How do you make companies accountable? Will consent work in this, and so on. And winner takes all is a competition issue. It's an antitrust issue, because antitrust laws in the United States were designed after Standard Oil. If you remember, you go back to look at history, Standard Oil, Sherman Antitrust Act, 1911, setting up of the antitrust thing, Monopoly Commission and all that. And it was really designed in an era of where physical assets, so the guy who owned the railroad called the shots, or the guy who owned all the oil drills called the shots. And then antitrust in the US evolved to other things. For example, AT&T decree in the 1980s, which basically said that AT&T should break up into AT&T, the long-distance company, and the 7 baby bells. And that was, again, an impact of antitrust. And then they took up the Microsoft case, and they had an agreement with Microsoft. So that's how antitrust has evolved. But antitrust was evolved in a pre-data era. So it was an era where either you controlled physical assets like railroads and oil, or you controlled digital assets like operating systems or fiber optic cables. But data as a thing, and that data can create winner-take-all behavior, and therefore the fundamentals of antitrust have to change, is an idea which is just gaining ground all over the world. There's no real body of knowledge among lawyers or among policymakers on what is the appropriate antitrust policy in this world of big data. So we have to think about all these things, right? So it's important to realize that what I'm talking about is not just a technology issue. Sure, it's all about complex technology and sophisticated algorithms and all that, but fundamentally it's a policy issue. As a country which has an open market, rightly so, so that the customer can get access to the best products and services in the world, how do you construct a policy on data which looks at these very subtle issues of data colonization, privacy, and competition, anti-competition, and how do you create a policy so that people benefit at the same time, if people benefit at the same time you have access to the best products and services, right? So what we are saying is this requires us to put what we call as inverting the data. In other words, putting the creator of the data at the center of his own data. A creator, whether it's an individual or a business, should have access to their own data. Now, so instead of data being used just to sell things to you, data is used to empower you. Now, this is different from the classic argument on privacy and all that, right? So the privacy argument is, how do you make sure that your data is not abused by either a company or by the government, et cetera, and therefore what are the kind of restrictions you have? You can either do it through consent or you can do it through accountability, all that. But this is about a positive side of data. We know that data is very powerful. We know that data has huge benefits. How do we make sure that Indians are able to use their own data to improve their lives? So this is a very fundamental thing. And this is not a question that is being discussed anywhere in the world. So if you guys are saying, oh, I have not seen this at Harvard and all, it's not going to be there, because this is fundamentally an Indian challenge. How do we take advantage of a data-rich society to empower 1 billion Indians to use their data well? So our idea of inversion is that the user or the person, the resident, the citizen is at the center of the data. So there will be many, many data producers, be it private company or be it the government, and how does that individual use that to get better things? How do they use data to get better credit? How do they use data to get better productivity on the farm? How do they use their data to improve their skills? How do they use their data to get a better job? And that is the whole idea. The data has to be inverted and the user has to be at the center of this data. And this is not protectionism. Again, people think we are not saying this is not protectionism. Everybody, company, global and Indian, should function in an open, competitive market. We are absolutely for that. However, how the rules that are there to collect and operate on their data have to be followed. There has to be a strategic framework, a law, which decides how data can be collected, how it can be used, what is the responsibility on the companies, on the governments, and what is the responsibility on these guys to give the data back so that an individual or a company can benefit from that data. So there's a fundamentally, it's a rethink of how we think about data, and it's a very, very important strategic issue that we need to think about. So inversion is really about empowering the user with choice so that he can have multiple providers and is able to share the data. I mean, we have come to accept choice as part of the nature of competition, right? So we tell our mobile companies that you have to implement mobile number portability. I should be able to change my mobile provider with one click. You can do that. We are telling our banks, you have to have bank account portability. If I'm not happy with one bank, I can go to another bank. The same thing must apply to data. If I as a consumer want to move something, some activity, I should be able to take my data and go somewhere else. That's my right. And this is not happening today. You don't have a framework to even say this should be done. So we think inverting the data is really because finally, since we don't trust anybody, especially all our activists don't trust no one, we don't trust the government, don't legal system, don't the media, might as well give the data to the user. That is the best thing. Let him decide what to do with his data, so it's complete libertarianism out here. So we think that inverting the data prevents colonization because finally I'm able to get my data back, it's not in some silo, and I'm able to extract value from the data for myself. This is not to say that the companies cannot extract. They can obviously mix and match all this data and do all the machine learning stuff. But in addition, the individual should be able to use his own data, work with some of the algorithms and get some benefit, get some better health care, or get some better loan or whatever. So that's one aspect. Second, it also helps in privacy because this allows the user to take his data and go. It creates choice. The user can take his data and go somewhere else. This is very important. I mean, there was a recent article in New York Times by Zingales. Zingales was the co-author of the book of, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, a book he co-wrote with Raghuram Rajan. And they argue that they should have a law which makes social graph portability. So if I'm not happy with my current social media provider, I take my social graph, go to some other company and start. And I believe that's how it worked with MySpace and Facebook. So people moved because they actually had social graph portability in those days. But if you don't have social graph portability, you're not going to go to a new company and say, I'll recreate my whole social graph. And therefore, that creates a barrier of switching. So we need to make sure that, so the more empowered the person is, the better it is for privacy. It also means that the agreement between the individual and the provider is within the law of the land. So the law will exactly say what are the rules of the game under which you can collect data in our sovereignty. By the way, this is what the Europeans are. The Chinese, of course, it's a different ballgame altogether. But even the Europeans are on the GDPR next year are basically going to lay down the rules under which you collect the data. And very importantly, once you invert the data, if I can get my data and go somewhere else, I'm increasing the scope for competition because I'm allowing new innovators to come, new innovative services to come, and I can switch. I don't get locked in. Other, you want to make sure there's no lock-in. And that's very important. And that's, again, the job of governments. Governments' job is to make sure that you have an open, competitive environment where people are able to take the data and go somewhere else. And that's very, very important for innovation. So what happens? Who benefits if we invert the data? Now, an important point to remember is that, again, India is different from the West. The West was economically rich before it was data rich. If you say the data rich era began 15 years back and accelerated 10 years back with the smartphone, already you were in a society that had per capita income of more than $40,000 or so, and the total ad spend in the US was $207 billion. It's probably more than that. And it's probably just one subcategory of ad spending. And the per capita ad spending is $591 per person. What you get on your television, your newspapers, your digital, EAO, all that. In India, the total spending for 1 billion people on ads is just $10 billion, which is why subscription model and all, by the Ken. And the per capita spending is $8. What does this mean? It means that if your model of revenue is advertising based, you can't go beyond the top 50 million people because they don't have the purchasing power for the ads. And if you don't have the purchasing power, nobody's going to put the ads. The person is going to, you have to charge less for the ads. So fundamentally, that model is meant for a rich country situation. However, if people are going to be data rich before they're economically rich, can we flip the argument and say, since the person has so much data about himself, is a way that he can be empowered to use his data to improve his life? This is a very fundamental, again, mental model shift. The idea of inverting the data is to put the power of the data in the hands of the user and take advantage of the arbitrage between his being data rich and not being economically rich or healthy or educated, and use that data to make those goals happen. So fundamentally, we have to rethink the model of how data should be used in the Indian context. So we'll give you 3 examples. Saying data is the new soil, because suddenly, from a farming perspective, we have a hell of a lot more data which we can get, right? We can get soil health maps, we can get local weather conditions, we can get, you can rent equipment, you can get market details from, futures markets and so on, you can get loans. So suddenly, the farmer is becoming data rich at a scale that is, again, unbelievable. Now, if we can build business models where the farmer is able to leverage her data-rich stuff to improve her productivity, reduce the failure of crop, have insurance, be able to sell at the right price, suddenly you improve farmer productivity, and the economy improves. And therefore, this is again thinking about how data can be used by a farmer to improve their life. That's just one example. Second is lack of credit. India is a hugely underserved market for credit. All credit goes to the big guys, and they all go to London. The small guy in India doesn't get credit from the financial system. The reason the small guy doesn't get credit from the financial system is that they don't have enough data about these guys, and therefore you don't want to give a loan to somebody you have no data with. And therefore, knowledge asymmetry leads to the person depending on money lenders and family and so on. Now, what will happen in the future is suddenly a small business will be generating a lot of data about his business, which was not true earlier. Now, there are going to be 8 million companies on the GST system. So they will file the GST returns. The government can give the GST returns saying, we certify that he has paid these taxes. So it's real data, it's authenticated and so on. He's able to have digital footprints because all his bill payment he does on the bill payment system. All his payments he does using a cashless transaction. So suddenly he actually has verifiable, trustable data on his business performance. and he can then go to a lender and say, give me a loan. And that's what data-based lending or flow-based lending is all about. And many companies, including MoneyTap here, are doing that. And think about an era where Indians will be able to get loans, whether they are businesses or individuals, with the power of the data. And it's more likely that that data will be able to ensure lower risk, because you'll have machine learning, you'll know exactly which behavior pattern the guy will pay back or not. So there's lots and lots of power of data. So suddenly India can democratize credit. Billion Indians can get access to credit. Or the same thing can happen with skills. Today we have no knowledge of the skills of a person. So whether the carpenter is a trainee carpenter or a highly skilled carpenter, he gets the same, because the buyer of that carpentry service has no mechanism to establish the quality. But if you're able to create some kind of a registry of the carpenter, he can put his credentials there, it can be certified, it can be trusted, then he's able to get better jobs. And because he sees that if he's a qualified carpenter, he gets higher income, he has the incentive to go and learn better carpentry. And therefore, you create a cycle of earning differentiation. So this again can be done using the data which a person generates from his business activities. So what we are saying here is, conceptually, we have the ability to remove knowledge asymmetry at scale. And a huge part of development is removing knowledge asymmetry. And if we can remove knowledge asymmetry at scale and put the data, invert it in the hands of the user, and if the user can go and use it to get better skills, better jobs, better education, better loans, and better health, then suddenly 1 billion people get the ability to improve their lives. And therefore, the businesses that will emerge in the future in India are not so much just copying some advertising model or something, but fundamentally saying, how do we create business in India which can allow people to leverage the data to improve their lives. And this is a fundamental shift, mental model shift that we have to do. So how do we do this? I mean, it's all very well giving all this GAN. Get me a water bottle. Thanks. Thanks. Now, we are very fortunate that India has some very unique digital infrastructure. And what happened? Yeah. So the first is what is collectively called as the India stack. And I explained how billion Aadhars, 1 billion authentications a month, 2 billion digital transactions. So it's really a big, it's not like some small system. It's a major, major system. So we have, and this, no other country has this. What happened? Yeah. Is it getting too boring? Huh? So far, okay. So far, all right. Yeah. So, and that's the India stack. And we have a second big thing which is happening, and it's happening in parallel, which is we are building these mega national platforms for business. So we have the GSTN, which has gone live. GSTN alone has 8 million businesses, average of 120 invoice line items per month, which means 1 billion transactions a month. The electronic tolling already does 7 million transactions a month, and 10 to 15% of highway transactions are now paid with electronic tolling. The Bharat Bill Payment System, Bharat Bill Payment System will process billions of invoices, insurance claims, electricity bills, all that. All these, so suddenly you have a digital platform for consumers and a national set of platforms for businesses, all of which are going to generate huge amounts of data which can be harnessed by the user. So this is a very important thing we have, and we are lucky that we are at this point where just as this thing is taking off, all this infrastructure is in place. The other important thing we have is we have a robust authentication infrastructure. Because when you go digital at this scale, when this PPT will be put out on a slide share, you don't have to take pictures. 2 factors, use a debit card and a PIN or whatever. India is the only country in the world which has a two-factor authentication capability for 1 billion people using public infrastructure. Just understand the significance of that. Billion people have Aadhaar, so I can do Aadhaar authentication with fingerprint and iris for 1 billion people, so one factor done. 1 billion mobile phones, mobile authentication can be done. A mobile authentication, you can check the mobile. So instead of a card, you have a mobile. So mobile becomes what you have, and Aadhaar becomes who you are. And then because of UPI, we have a national interoperable PIN infrastructure. I don't know whether you guys realize this, that because of UPI, I can use my bank PIN anywhere to verify to have a verification done. Because the bank PIN is standardized. You either have a 4-digit PIN or a 6-digit PIN, and when you use a UPI app, you enter your PIN in app by one bank, but the verification is done by the bank where your debit account is. So the fact that you can do interoperable PIN means that I can now mix and match my authentications and create two-factor authentication by combining Aadhaar with mobile phone or mobile phone with PIN. All this is possible. It's very important. Nobody else has this stuff. And you also can use different identity in different domains. All these guys say, oh, Aadhaar will be everywhere. Aadhaar may not be everywhere. So you can say that in the driver's license system, use the driver license ID as your domain ID. In the financial system, use your PAN number as the domain ID. In your skill system, create a skill ID. In your healthcare record system, create a healthcare record ID. So basically, you can create domain IDs so that this worry that somebody will combine all the database, all that goes away. And you can actually offer the India stack by combining this authentication capability with these domain IDs to create all kinds of possibilities on the India stack, which can be used on any kind of device. Just think about what this means. I can use this, any India stack capability combining any KYC with any authentication on any device. Okay, so I can use it on a phone, a POS, whatever. So what this means is that, therefore, if you look at the India stack, I can do the authentication on any ID. I can do the KYC on any ID. I can do the e-sign on any ID. I can do the locker on any ID. I can do the consent on any ID. So suddenly you're opened up, and you're also taking care of any lingering privacy issues that people have, because you have now made it a multi-domain model of authentication. Again, only India has this capability. So we have this ability to provide consent, and my colleagues will later on go into how we can do this. Because to do this, 1 billion people should be able to get real-time data from hundreds of databases in a few seconds. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And we have that technology. And that's why this whole architecture, which they will refer to, is called as the data empowerment and protection architecture, about how you ask for data. Again, this is not consent in the privacy sense of what you can do with my data. It's a consent for sharing my data with somebody else so my life improves. Please understand the subtlety there. So data is empowering when it is in the hands of the people, right? If you put data to everybody, they benefit. And thus, inverting the data gives us both freedom and choice. And that's what we call as data democracy. It's the digital equivalent of giving everybody the vote. You're giving everybody the data. And this also means that the way we manage the economy will change, because data will enable you to manage the economy very differently. Today, how does it work? There's some survey organization, they go around asking questions. Some 2 years later, you get some GDP number, then they argue about GDP, all that. You don't need to do all that. You have real-time data on the economy. You can get from the GSTN system, you can say, so many cold steel rods were sold in Chandigarh this week, because you have the HSN codes of the product in the database. You can say the truck movement on this highway went down by 3% last week, because you have the ETC details. You can say that digital transactions went up from 5% of economy to 7%, because you have the cashless details. So suddenly, the fact that these systems are going to generate data, and that's why it's very important to think about how do you have a real-time way of looking at the economic change with data. And that's why, what is the philosophy there of public data, anonymized data, all that becomes important. My colleagues will talk about that a little later. So what is required to implement this? What is required to implement this? It's actually very simple because a lot of the plumbing is in place to implement this. And really three things. One is governments need to unlock public data, which they're doing already in some sense. For example, the entire driver's license database is available to you on the digital locker of the government. Now again, this is not a, people say, oh, all the data, this data is only available to that person. It's not that I can't go and see your driver's license. I can see my driver's license with the suitable, which is why the authentication becomes so important. With my two-factor authentication, say I can get my driver's license data, or income tax already gives your TDS returns, traces system gives you your TDS, except that you have to enter username, password. So this will have to be more API based. GSTN will give your transaction volumes. UPI will give your how much you spent and so on. So fundamentally, government has to unlock their data, which they're already doing. This requires only executive action. Just government saying we will open up our data to individuals to use for their future. Okay? Second, regulators have to do the same for regulated markets. So government for databases that they have, like GST and income tax, and regulators for databases that is under their jurisdiction. So banks will do it for banks to give my own statement back to me. The SEBI will say, I get my mutual fund transactions back from the mutual fund provider. Insurance company will say, I get my insurance payment details from insurance provider. Telecom will say, I will get my recharge pattern back from my insurance provider, all that stuff. Now this is something happening around the world, but in a very sporadic fashion. In Europe, it's being done for the financial system through what's called as PSD2, Payment System Directive 2, which requires banks in the next couple of years to give a customer back his own statement when he asks for it. A similar initiative is happening in Europe with the CMA, the market authority, saying 9 of the top banks must give consumers back their own data in the digital form, and that those pilots are going on. It is being done in US, Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank Act requires banks to give consumers their own data. So this is a global trend. In India recently, the TRAI has put out a consultation paper on data and how it can come back to the user. It's also happening in other sectors. For example, in the US healthcare area, they've introduced something called Blue Button. I don't know how many of you know about Blue Button, but Blue Button basically says, I can ask for my healthcare record by just pressing the blue button. And now they've published an advanced standard called Blue Button Plus. And the Veterans Administration and others have implemented this. This is a way of unlocking healthcare records. So this philosophy applies to financial services, healthcare, telecom, everybody, but conceptually the same thing. How do you allow users to get their own data back so they can share it with somebody else? And that's the consent for sharing. So the first one is done by government. The second one is done by regulators. However, what about all the agencies in the country which are neither government nor regulated? And for that, we need a policy or a law. And that's where the whole effort is. And I do hope that the Justice Sri Krishna committee, which is looking at data protection, will look at all these points, because that will apply to healthcare records, business data, transactions, and all kinds of things. And here again, by law, you're basically saying how data is to be shared and how a person can get access to his own data. Again and again, let me tell you, this is not about accessing somebody else's data. This is not all those things. This is about how do I get my own data back. And I think we'll all agree that getting my own data back is a perfectly reasonable request. And the good news about all this, it doesn't cost money. This is not about spending billions of dollars. It's about thinking it through and coming out with a strategy and policy. And that's what we feel needs to be done at the earliest. We think that we have a unique chance to leapfrog because data at this scale can eliminate knowledge asymmetry in a wide variety of areas. And so, thank you.